Hi, my name's Phil. I talk about politics, and before we get started, I've sort of moved, so I don't know whether the sound will sound quite right. You can sort of see there's blinds and light shining through straight onto my face. We'll try and sort that one out. I've sort of moved into the conservatory. But anyway, in this video, what I'm going to be taking a look at are the latest figures in terms of the rise of unemployment, much of it, of course, driven by COVID, and the extent to which there is set to be more net unemployment over the coming months. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this is essentially about the present as well as the short-term future, because as things stand, the latest figures show that the number of workers dropping off the UK payroll has reached 730,000 between March and July. And which is the period of time, of course, for which there was some semblance of lockdown in the country, varied from quite severe to coming out of it. Now, many of those retaining their jobs have found themselves with, of course, bonuses cancelled for this year and pay freezers. Obviously, this is better than losing your job. And personally, I'm not someone who would attack a company doing that if their profits are being hit to the point where, frankly, they can't actually afford those pay rises. It would be a different thing if a company wasn't under those conditions. And of course, there will be a lot of companies in the UK where, quite frankly, they will be doing well to keep their employees on, albeit with a bit of a pay freeze. On average, pay is, of course, down. Not simply static, so we can talk about pay freezes, but the average is that net wages have actually gone down for the first time since records began at the start of the millennium. And nonetheless, this is a headache for the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, because he's faced with lower tax receipts. Of course, there's not as many people working, the average wages are lower, which means you're not getting as much in income tax. And of course, you're going to have more people requiring state benefits. So your income is down, your outgoings are up. In addition, surveys of British employers have found that in the short-term future, because that's the situation now, in the short-term future, a third of employers in this country plan to cut more jobs over the next few months due to the phasing out of the furlough scheme. And, there are other businesses that will, of course, be expected to hire more employees, but in terms of where the balance is, there are definitely sectors where there's going to be a net increase of vacancies. Office-based work appears to be the main driver of that. But the reports are saying that there is still going to be a net increase in unemployment, as a result of the combination of a lack of confidence at the business, with having to live with the effects of the coronavirus, and they don't really know what that's going to mean for their business, as well as a lack of support from the government for those businesses. Now, in terms of who this is hitting the most, essentially, it's younger workers, which does not, of course, surprise me, because one reason why I always encourage young people to go out and vote whenever there's an opportunity, even if they don't want to vote for a candidate, I say, well, you can go and vote and you spoil your ballot. That way you're not actually voting for anyone, but you are registering the fact that you have voted. You are saying to candidates in future elections that this demographic, the young people, their vote is up for grabs, because at the moment it's a demographic that is poorly represented in the democratic process. And yes, I know people will say, well, the reason why young people don't vote so much is because politicians don't engage with them. That is arse about face thinking, because politicians don't engage with young people. That is true. That is because young people aren't offering them their votes. The way you get a politician to do what you want is you dangle your vote in front of them. Show them that the votes are up for grabs, and you just watch to see them scramble to put in place or to offer policies that would benefit young people. So, young people are the most shafted by the current economic climate, as they were during the previous one, to be honest, because it's not in the government's interest to make an effort for you. That's all there is to it. The Office for National Statistics has shown another huge rise in the number of 0 hours contracts. These are now over 1 million. It's over 1 million people on 0 hours contracts, which not only is a good way of fiddling the employment figures for the government, but it disproportionately impacts on the 18 to 24-year-olds. The official unemployment figures will be presented as largely the same before, as if there's no real difference, but how the government classifies unemployment is irrelevant. What matters is the number of people that are actually being productive, how productive as we as a country, and the reality is much less. And what we're earning is also on average less. So the country is less productive and it is earning less. That's what matters. That is not an enviable position for any government, particularly one that wants to cut taxes, waste what little public money it actually gathers, and still wants to pretend that it's actually providing for its citizens. And the economic problems for the government will also become political problems by the end of October, because that is the intended end to the furlough scheme. At its height, the furlough scheme was being used to retain 9.2 million workers in the UK. It is still, at this point, being used for 7.5 million. And that's after we've reopened much of the economy. Less than 1 in 5 of the originally furloughed workers has returned to work. Now, that means that the bulk of them are still not able to produce for their employers. Otherwise, they would be doing so. Now, I'm not saying that all 7.5 million still on furlough are going to find themselves without work at the end of October. And those forecasting are certainly not saying that. But, you just have to look at the situation. One, if those workers are still furloughed now, it's because despite the easing of restrictions, their employer can still not find useful work for them to do. 2, there are no further planned easing of restrictions to help in any appreciable way those businesses that are not already back to full action. I mean, obviously at some point there will be, but it is not planned in the immediate future. In fact, there have been some planned easings that have been cancelled. The third thing to bear in mind is there's a lot of talk about having to reclose some parts of the economy again in order to manage the infection rate when schools are reopened very shortly. 4, even without that consideration, businesses are in an uncertain position as local spikes could close them down at a moment's notice anyway, regardless of the overall national picture. And 5, as if lockdown uncertainty weren't enough, unemployment prospects were already looking like, they were going to be on the increase at the end of the furlough scheme, because that coincides with the date when the government has to announce what agreement we've got with the EU in order for it to be ratified by the end of the year. Now, whatever that announcement is likely to let some businesses know that they're going to struggle next year. And of course, the announcement may be for no agreement at all, which is unlikely, but it's possible, in which case that's going to be a serious problem. The announcement will be disappointing for some businesses come what may now, because we are going to have friction in terms of our trade with the EU. So some businesses at least are going to have to lower their ambitions for 2021. We just don't know which ones yet, and they don't know which ones yet. If it is an announcement of an effective no deal, that will be a lot of businesses. In addition, this is also likely to be a time when the system supposedly designed to manage friction with EU trade will also be exposed as being nowhere near ready at the end of the transition period. At the moment, there may be people who believe the government when they say that things will be in place. And as if that weren't enough, we do not know how the COVID infection rates will be doing as we move into autumn as well. On the government's past record, they are likely to be doing a good job of blaming others, but that doesn't actually do anything about the consequences for, amongst other things, the job market. Because as far as I can tell, the short-term forecasts for employment in the UK are very much based around our capacity to cope with COVID and are not really taking into account any speculation onto our position in 2021 Brexit-wise. And in terms of any hopes of the government managing the situation, we only have to look at how they've managed it so far. So in terms of protecting jobs, the furlough scheme was a good move and it was effective, but that was always a sticking plaster. Now, they're taking that sticking plaster off and the wound hasn't even closed yet. They haven't actually addressed the wound itself. And you just have to compare ourselves with other countries in terms of the latest economic news. We have suffered more than the rest of the major economies of Europe in terms of GDP loss. And the reason for this is partly because we locked down much later than they did, which meant we had to keep our lockdown for longer. We had to lock down for longer. We did so, of course, in the hope that we wouldn't have to lock down at all. Now, it is possible, in fact likely, that we haven't even learned that lesson, which means that we'll make the same or very similar mistakes again. Another factor that explains our especially harsh contraction is that we are a service-driven economy. Now, we may or may not come through COVID next year. We hope that we will. But at that point, we have to consider Brexit again, because that especially hits our service sector, which, remember, is worth 4 times as much to us as our trade in goods. And, that is going to mean that when those other European economies are rebuilding, because they've been hit hard, just not as hard as us, as they are starting to rebuild, we will still be struggling. It's not just that we will be behind them. We may still not be moving properly into growth because of that as well. But there it is. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, when hopefully I'll choose a more suitable time of day to record, I'll see you later.